Anyone remember? Anything?
So yesterday there was a program for the Gaur Purnima. There was a groundbreaking ceremony at Mayapur. And B.V. Puri Maharaj was invited to place like the grains and everything in the pit.
7:30. Yeah.
And then some of the God brothers criticized Prabhupada for the title Prabhupada. But
Yes.
Prabhupada said that he has not asked for it, like devotees gave him the title.
And Pandal program at Bombay, right? They were living in mosquitoes tents, and Brahmananda Prabhu made a nice, at least better setup. The date is moved. Radha Ras Bihari moved, right, at the Juhu. And I think this is one here, right? Did we end here? Okay, let me see. No, I didn't think I moved it. Within a few days of his arrival at Juhu, Prabhupada was ready to hold the groundbreaking and cornerstone laying ceremony, another tactic for securing possession of the land. But it was more than a tactic, as he wanted a temple constructed as soon as possible. Radha Ras Bihari should not remain standing in a tent, but should be protected by a silver and teakwood simhasana on a marble altar. They should be surrounded by deities of two gopis, Lalita and Visakha, and the temple should have marble domes more than 100 feet height. Thousands should come daily for darshan and prasadam. One morning, in the midst of the festival activities, the devotees of Hare Krishna land joined Prabhupada in a simple cornerstone laying ceremony. They had dug a deep ceremonial pit and surrounded it with bricks. Prabhupada descended and placed a deity of Sesa. Then, sitting on a simple platform, Prabhupada accompanied the kirtan by playing a brass gong. While one by one the devotees came before him and threw dirt into the pit, filling it, while smoke rose from the sacrificial fire. Prabhupada was outraged that Brahmananda Swami had agreed to pay the contractors 50,000 rupees for the pandal construction. 50,000 rupees? It was the same old thing, the foolish Western disciples getting cheated. Sorry, AJ. Prabhupada refused to pay 4,000 rupees, should be more than enough. When the contractors came to see him, he told them that he had little money and that they would have to be satisfied with 4,000 rupees. They protested, but Prabhupada became angry and insisted, accept it. You are making 500% profit. With 4,000, you are saying you're making 500% profit. I don't know. Okay. As soon as they see us, Prabhupada said later, they said, these Americans, they've got money. Our work is going on in India, but as soon as money is being spent, 50% is being spoiled because you Americans are inexperienced, and what can be done? The Indians want your money and they cheat like anything. During the Pandal festival, the tenement neighbors, is tenement neighbor? I never heard about this statement. During the Pandal festival, the tenement neighbors had become disturbed by kirtans over the loudspeaker. They were already disturbed that their landlord, Mr. N, was slow to repair the buildings and would sometimes let them go a full week without water before fixing the plumbing. Being suddenly forced to live with more than 20 American devotees only exacerbated the dissatisfaction. Exacerbated, right? Some of the neighbors were converted Christians and unsympathetic to Vaishnavism. They even feared their children might again be converted to Hinduism. Some tenants claimed that devotees were infringing on their privacy. Some criticized the devotees for arguing among themselves, and others criticized that the unmarried man and woman were living in close proximity, even though in separate quarters. So this is the baggage of things with all auspiciousness and so many obstacles and issues going on. Prabhupada was ready, the groundbreaking ceremony was done, and all the devotees Prabhupada installed and put the Ananta Sesa under in the ground, and all the devotees put the dirt, and ceremony was done. And the Prabhupada has this plan how this deity should be, made Lalita Visakha Sakhi. Now, very few people joined this ceremony, but Prabhupada is mad. Brahmanand Swami gave 50,000 rupees. Actually, 50,000 rupees is a big amount those days. He has no idea. Prabhupada is an outrage. He says, how come you give 50,000 rupees? And it's not new. Now also, anyone comes from America. It doesn't have to be American now. Even Indians go, they know this man is from America, they will expect a lot of money everywhere. And that's why Vrindavan has become so expensive. Why? We give freely our money. Oh, okay, doesn't matter for us, it's tiny money. But for them, it's a lot of money. So he said, how did you do this? But he managed to give only looks like 4,000 rupees. And he said, you never learn. You're being spoiled because of American inexperience, because they don't know what is bargaining and everything. So festival, the neighbors started complaining with loud noise, loudspeaker. They're already upset with Mr. Nair because he was not repairing the buildings. Looks like they're the tenants. Mr. Nair was the landlord. And they're also a little disturbed seeing all the devotees were making noise. It's a different culture. It's a different culture. So looks like there's a lot of austerity and sacrifices will go. Ajay, please read.
A few of the neighbors, however, could see that Western Vaishnavas were struggling to sincerely worship Radha and Krishna. None of the tenants criticized Prabhupada, however, so when he was present, he was able to pacify them and resolve any disagreements. But Prabhupada knew that after he left, the situation could easily become volatile. Prabhupada was planning an extensive world tour, traveling eastward to Australia, Japan, Hawaii, the US, and perhaps Mexico and Europe. It might be as long as half a year before he would return to India, and he wanted things to progress smoothly in Bombay without him. A few days before Prabhupada's departure, Madhuvisa Swami complained, "I'm not feeling very enthusiastic here. I think I need a change." Prabhupada asked him where he wanted to go, and Madhuvisa replied that he was thinking of Australia. Prabhupada said, "Yes, I am going there. You also come." Ramananda Swami told Prabhupada that the preaching was deteriorating in Nairobi in his absence, and Prabhupada agreed that he should return to his duties there. Again, Prabhupada had to choose a new Bombay manager, and this time he chose Giriraja, a young brahmachari and leading preacher in making ISKCON life members. Prabhupada reasoned that since the essence of management was to collect donations and make life members, and since Giriraja was expert at that, even though he was young and otherwise inexperienced, he had the most important qualifications. Prabhupada had already found Giriraj to be simple and submissively dedicated to helping him develop Hare Krishna land. I love that name, Hare Krishna land. Giriraja, Srila Prabhupada said, you will do Giriraj. So I said, yes, Srila Prabhupada, whatever you say. I wasn't actually very happy about it, but I understood that one should be surrendered to the spiritual master, and whatever he said, one should do. So I accepted. Prabhupada said that good management meant that whatever needs doing, you do it. That's all. Later, I went to see Srila Prabhupada, and he was sitting behind his desk. He said, now the full responsibility is on you. I winced when he said that, because I wasn't used to taking responsibility. During Prabhupada's stay in Bombay, Hans Kielman, a young architect from Holland, had come to hear the lectures and had become interested in Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada convinced Hans to become a devotee and to help build the Hare Krishna city in Bombay. Under Prabhupada's direction, Hans at once began to make architectural drawings for the buildings. Hans: Prabhupada said, "Now you listen carefully. Lord Krishna has sent you here. You must design these temples for him. You must do these very sincerely and not be afraid." I was completely surrendered. That moment was really ecstasy for me. He had a pile of photographs on his desk and he gave them to me and said, "Look at this." I looked at the pictures and they were photographs of the new Govindaji temple in Vrindavan. He said, "I want you to make a design like this." So I asked him, "How big, Srila Prabhupada?" And he gave me a piece of typing paper and said I should draw on this paper. Then he gave me the photographs and a pencil and a ruler. He took me to the next room and told me to sit down at the table. Pradyumna was there with all his Sanskrit books. Shamasundar was there typing the letters, and suddenly I was in between making the drawings. So,
First of all, do you remember now who is Giriraj?
yeah, you're saying, right? He still runs things, right?
No, he doesn't run. You remember I had scheduled a call with His Holiness Giriraj Swami Maharaj a couple of months back. Philadelphia and Delaware joined.
Yeah.
So you all recall is a very advanced and very advanced and pure devotee. So you all got the opportunity. Now you're hearing now. You all remember, everyone?
Yes, Prabhu.
Okay.
I think he was sharing Prabhupada's experience in college when he first met Prabhupada.
Right. Ajay, please go ahead.
So Prabhupada realized that things were kind of volatile there, and the tenants weren't huge fans of the Westerners that were living there. And so since he was there, he was able to kind of keep them happy, but he had a feeling that once he left, things could get bad. And he was about to, right? He was about to head to Australia, Japan, Hawaii, essentially going all the way back around the world. And it could be, a year and a half until he'd get back there. So he was trying to think of how he could make things run smoothly. And Madhuvisa said, I'm not really liking this at all here. I think I need to go somewhere else. And he said, "Where do you want to go?" And he said, "Australia." Prabhupada said, "All right, yep, you're coming with me. Let's go." And so as a result, he needed to figure out somebody to manage manage things in Bombay. And he chose Giriraj, who, despite being young, but he was really good at collecting donations and getting life members for ISKCON. So Prabhupada said, you're in charge of everything now, and he says, he's like, "Well, you'll do this?" And Giriraj said, "Yeah, I'll do whatever you say," because and he said he was like, "I wasn't happy about it, but I knew that surrender to the spiritual master was a requirement." And so he accepted. And he said, "Full responsibility is on you now." And he said, he's like, "I didn't like that because I'm not used to taking responsibility." So then also, while Prabhupada was still in Bombay, this architect from Holland came in and became a devotee. And Prabhupada right away said, I need you to start making the drawings for this Hare Krishna city. Start sketching this. And he gave him a stack of photos and showed him the new temple in Vrindavan and said, "Here, kind of make it look like this." But then he didn't really give him much direction outside of that because how big? And he's like, "Just draw it on here. Here's a piece of paper."
Wow, totally. And this man, they did good job. I think I went there.
Yeah, I like. He's like, "How big? Here's a piece of paper. Go to town. Start drawing." And he sat there in the office there with Shamasundra and just started making the drawings.
Second,
Prabhupada said Giriraj and the others would have to collect 64 lakhs of rupees for the construction. The devotees had no idea how they would raise even a fraction of that amount, but Prabhupada gave them some ideas. He talked to them about enlisting the support of influential men by using the Bent Nama system, whereby a person purchases the use of a guest room for life. And there were other ways. But the immediate step was to get the land. They had possession of the land, but before building, they should have the deed. Since Mr. N was already overdue in delivering the deed, Prabhupada told Giriraj to press him to comply with the written agreement and deliver the deed at once. In Prabhupada's last lecture in Bombay, he spoke about the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan and the bittersweet ecstasy of their hankering to be with Krishna. Some of Prabhupada's disciples took it that Prabhupada was speaking about this because he was himself going to be leaving for a long time. At the airport the next day, there was a joyful farewell as Prabhupada waited for his flight to Australia. Sitting in the VIP lounge surrounded by devotees, Prabhupada watched Madhudvisha Swami lead an ecstatic kirtan. If you go on having kirtans like this, Prabhupada told the devotees, our Bombay project will be successful. When Prabhupada saw Mrs. N had come, he exclaimed, "Oh, Mrs. N, you are also here. You are becoming one of us." Prabhupada had the extraordinary ability to bring a spiritual vision into physical reality, to change a part of the material world into spiritual energy so that even a common man could perceive the spiritual reality. This was Prabhupada's constant effort. Often a transcendentalist hesitates to deal with the material world, fearing he may become spiritually weakened. The Vedic injunctions therefore warn the transcendentalist to avoid associating with money and materialistic persons. But Prabhupada, following the principles taught by Srila Rupa Goswami, saw that everything material had the potential of being used in the service of Krishna and thus of regaining its spiritual nature. Following this principle, an expert devotee, although apparently acting within the material space, could remain always in touch with the spiritual energy. For such a devotee, nothing was material. So here, Prabhupada told Giriraj that they would have to raise funds for 64 lakhs rupees for the construction of the temple. And the devotees were not sure how they would raise that huge amount. Prabhupada gave them an ideas, like saying that some rich people could could donate and they could use the guest room for life. So that is like one way they could do that, so that they can get more donations. And then, but before they go that, they need to get the land. The land was still in the deed was still in Mr. N's name. So he was overdue in that, and Prabhupada asked Giriraj to press Mr. N to give them to deliver the deed. And in the last lecture in Bombay, Prabhupada spoke about the 6 Goswamis of Vrindavan, and they're always hankering to be with Krishna. And some disciples took it that Prabhupada himself was going to go on a world tour, and he was also hankering that he was going to be away from Vrindavan. And in the next day at the airport, there was a nice farewell. As Prabhupada waited for his flight, Madhuvisa led an ecstatic kirtan, and Mrs. N also came there, and Prabhupada exclaims, speaking to her, saying that Mrs. N, you are becoming one of us. Here it says that Prabhupada had the extraordinary ability to bring to change like anything in the material world into spiritual energy, so that way even a common man could understand the reality. So in most cases, like anybody who's a transcendentalist, they hesitate to deal with the material world, like fearing that they would become attracted to the materialistic things. But Prabhupada shows an example that even though it looked from an outside that they were using everything material, but he was using everything for the service of Krishna, and thus those material things were also regaining their spiritual nature. So I think following this principle, he was still in touch with the spiritual energy, and nothing was material. Nothing is material for a devotee.
Nipa.
In the Vedic scriptures, the great devotee Narada Muni, because of his ability to convert materialistic men into devotees, is referred to as Chintamani, touchstone. Just as Chintamani is said to convert iron into gold, so Narada could transform a beast-like hunter into a pure Vaishnava. And as Narada is glorified in the Vedas for accomplishing such feats in bygone ages, so Srila Prabhupada of Krishna consciousness that he could change a materialist into a completely renounced active devotee of the Lord. And now, after recruiting a number of devotees from Maya's camp, he wanted to engage them in transforming as much as possible of the material world into living spirit. By his transcendental visionary words, he was attempting to convert stone and human energy into glorious spiritual temples. While ambitious materialists sometimes criticize transcendentalists as unproductive, Prabhupada, because of his constant activity, could never be so accused. Rather, people would criticize him as being a capitalist in the dress of a sannyasi. But such criticism never deterred Prabhupada. He was carrying out the desires of the previous acharyas. He had written this conclusion as Srimad Bhagavatam even before coming to America in 1965. Therefore, all the sages and devotees of the Lord have recommended that the subject matter of art, science, philosophy, physics, chemistry, psychology, and all other branches of knowledge should be wholly and solely applied in the service of the Lord. Prabhupada wanted to convert significant portions of the material world into the spiritual world. In attempting to construct a spiritual city in Jew, he realized he was launching a major attack against Maya. Within a few months, so many complications and headaches had already disturbed his plans, and more would come. The battle was just beginning. So here in the Vedic scripture, in the Vedic scriptures, like a great devotee Narada Muni had the ability to convert materialistic men into devotees and was referred to as Chintamani, a touchstone. And just as the Chintamani was able to convert iron into gold, Narada could also transform beast-like hunter into a pure Vaishnava. And Narada is therefore glorified in the Vedas for accomplishing such feats. Srila Prabhupada is considered similarly potent touchstone in the present age. And again, Srila Prabhupada has proved himself by his straightforward application of Krishna consciousness that could change a materialist into a completely renounced devotee. And after recruiting devotees from the Maya's camp, he wanted to engage them in as much as possible of the material world into spiritual world. And by his transcendental visionary words, he was attempting to do so. And while the ambitious materialistic sometimes criticized transcendentalists as unproductive, Prabhupada because of his constant activity, could was never accused of doing so, and rather people criticized him as being capitalist who was dressed in a form of a sannyasi. But such criticism never affected Prabhupada. He still carried on the desires of the previous acharyas. He had written about this in his Srimad Bhagavatam also before coming to America in 1965. And therefore all the sages and devotees of the Lord have recommended the subject matter that of any subject matter, art, science, philosophy, psychology, everything should be applied to the service in the service of Lord. And Prabhupada could convert a significant portion of the material world into the spiritual world. And in order to construct a spiritual city in Jew, he didn't realize that he had actually launched a major attack against the Mayavadis. Within a few months, many complications and headaches had disturbed his plans, and more were about to come. But the battle was just the beginning for him. Sometimes Prabhupada's disciples found the work to be draining and stressful. They would become bewildered. They had come to spiritual life for bliss, not for anxiety. Prabhupada's presence and his constant encouragement helped them to remain steadfast. He knew that once they tasted the nectar of selfless dedication to Krishna, they would never accept anything lesser. He would encourage them, reminding them of the words of spiritual predecessors like Bhakti Vinoda Thakura, who had said, "Difficulties undertaken in the course of your devotional service, I will consider the greatest happiness." So the disciples were at times finding the work draining and stressful, and they were bewildered. And they came for spiritual life for bliss, not for anxiety. And Prabhupada's presence and constant encouragement would help them to keep life focused. And he knew that once they had tested the nectar of selfless dedication, they would not accept nothing lesser to it. And Prabhupada would encourage them, remind them of the spiritual predecessors like Bhakti Vinoda Thakura, who had once mentioned, "Difficulties undertaken in the course of your devotional service, I will consider the greatest happiness."
Thank you. I'm hearing now that Prabhupada, some of the disciples are finding stressful. 60 lakhs to collect that place is it's a big amount that time. You can say it's several $1 million, like that kind of thing. But still, they all did it. What a great. Anyone wants to share any, let's have a little reflection on this, please. He was feeling insecure now. Bombay is a big project and nobody's, not an experienced devotee there, experts to take care of it. But still, now he's Giriraj Swami.
I think he started the projects in Mayapur and Vrindavan also in this same year. So three major projects same time.
Yeah, he got the land in all these places, right? And anything else?
He asked many devotees, at least 50 devotees should come from United States and help the projects.
The whole army. Yes, right.
And he once mentioned that rather than the birthplace, it's the activities at the place which counts more.
You're right. Service is more important. What Chaitanya Mahaprabhu did, and that's we should focus on more. Yeah.
In the Bombay project, when people thought it's a very big project and how they can live in such environment, and they want doorknobs and water, running water, then he encouraged them, saying, "Don't you want to be purified? It's okay to use. It's okay to serve like that for devotional service."
And Bombay temple is actually the head office of ISKCON now also. Very nice. Anyone else? Madhurisa Prabhu is going to Australia, right? So we'll move to the next chapter, chapter 40. Here you are. Prasanthi can read.
Around the world, but absorbed in Bombay, Prabhupada traveled with 3 disciples, Shyam Sundara as his secretary, Pradyumna as his servant and Sanskrit editor, and Nanda Kumara as his cook. The first stop was Singapore, where, without explanation, immigration authorities refused Prabhupada entry into the country. Sympathetic Indians in Singapore had arranged for Prabhupada to lecture and had even mailed hundreds of invitations, but Prabhupada, disappointed and feeling ill, had to continue the 12-hour flight to Sydney. April 1st, 1972, Prabhupada planned to stay a few days in Sydney before going to Melbourne. Although the Krishna conscious movement was young in Australia, Prabhupada saw positive signs, devotees to initiate TV and radio appearances, and an interested crowd at his morning lectures in the temple. This was only his second visit to Australia. On his first visit, almost a year ago, he had installed the deities Radha Gopinatha and had prayed to them, "Now I am leaving you in the hands of the Lechas. I cannot take the responsibility. You please guide these boys and girls and give them the intelligence to worship you very nicely." Now, on returning and seeing the deities beautifully dressed and well cared for, he felt happy. After 5 days of preaching, he flew on to Melbourne. Upananda. In Melbourne, Prabhupada spoke at the town hall and all the Melbourne hippies came. There was a man there called the Wizard. He used to be a professor at the university, but he resigned his post so he could carry out his shenanigans. He was very intellectual. He was dressed in a black cape and leotard, and he got up as soon as Srila Prabhupada asked for questions. He had a group of his own followers. First, he spoke very respectfully. Excuse me, Your Divine Grace. I have been listening to your lecture, but I have one thing I would like to say in this regard. I believe that I am God. I am the center of the universe, and I will prove sometime next year that I am the center of the universe.
That's funny. Sometimes next year, like scientists prove, very soon we'll make you immortal. But no one is saving from corona. Go ahead.
Prabhupada traveled with 3 disciples, Shyamsundara as his secretary, Pradyumna as his servant and Sanskrit editor, and Nanda Kumara as his cook. First, he stopped at Singapore, but due to immigration issues, he was unable to step into the country. So he continued to Sydney. At Sydney, before going to Melbourne, so he stayed a few days in Sydney, and he was there before when he installed the deities Radha Gopinatha. At that time, he prayed that the devotees are very new, and he asked the deities to take all the responsibility, and he should lead them to serve the deities. And now he saw, and he was very happy now by seeing the deities nicely dressed and well cared for. And he also saw that there were some devotees to initiate, and there were some TV and radio appearances, and he also saw the crowd as very interesting. And then Upananda says in Melbourne, Prabhupada spoke at the town hall, and some hippies came, and there was one person who heard the whole lecture, and towards the end, he very politely started talking, but he declared himself as God and says he is going to prove himself as the center of the universe.
An interesting statement. Look at this. That I will become God next year or something like that?
I'll show you, prove it to you next year.
Prove it next year. God needs proof. God is going on training. Do you all remember last time when Prabhupada was in Australia, he was mad that there were no one came to pick, and all these centers were so bad. They didn't know how to cook. And so Prabhupada installed the deities. No, that's another in Melbourne also, a little not in good shape. Okay, now we will see who is Vijayanand Prabhu.
Prabhupada said, that's all right. Everybody is thinking like that. What makes you different? Actually, the wizard's whole game was that he wanted to be different, his dress, everything. So Prabhupada exposed this, exposed him as just another materialistic fool. Everybody started laughing and clapping. Auckland, April 14, 1972. The devotees had just opened a temple in New Zealand a few weeks before Prabhupada's arrival. Prabhupada stayed a couple of days and installed Radha Krishna deities. Bhurijana. Prabhupada installed large marble deities, but there was only one girl to take care of them. Prabhupada was insisting that the deities should be installed anyway, that they should be taken care of properly. He demanded that they should have many sets of clothes immediately. So some devotees built a temporary wooden altar and put up a curtain for the deities. The curtains fell down. Everything was going wrong. It was confusing and everyone was upset. So Srila Prabhupada just took over. He said, put this here, put that back up there, do this, do that. He completely took command of the whole situation. The devotees put the curtains back and Prabhupada said, get rid of this Vyasasana. And they took the Vyasasana out because it was so big and the room was so small and there was no room for the people. Prabhupada just put a mat on the floor and sat down on that. Prabhupada visited for one night in Hong Kong where he lectured at a program arranged by Bhurijana and his wife Jagatarini. Bhurijana. We had taught the Indian children to sing the prayers to the spiritual master, so we had them sing for Prabhupada. He looked at me and he was really pleased. Then he said, your wife said there are no interested people, but you have so many students here. I said, you have so many students, Prabhupada. At the end of the lecture, Prabhupada asked if there were any questions, and a little Indian boy raised his hand and asked, who started the forest fire? The boy was thinking of a forest fire mentioned in the Krishna book in Krishna's pastime, but all he said was, who started the forest fire? But Prabhupada took the question in a different way, that this material world is like a blazing forest fire, just like the prayers to the spiritual master and had described. So Prabhupada said, no one started the forest fire. It started automatically, just like in the forest, by the rubbing of two bamboos, a fire may start. But by chanting Hare Krishna, we can get out of this forest fire of material life. So here, Prabhupada was replying to that the remarks of wizard. He was mentioning that everyone is thinking that they are the god, and what makes you different. And basically, Prabhupada figured out like he's just another materialistic fool, and everyone started laughing and clapping. And then Prabhupada travels to New Zealand because the devotees just opened a temple there a few weeks before Prabhupada's arrival. And Prabhupada stayed a couple of days and installed the Radha Krishna deities. And here Bhurijana Prabhu mentioned that Prabhupada installed large marble deities, but there was like only one girl to take care of them. And Prabhupada has given instruction that the deity should be installed installed anyway, and it should be taken care of properly. And they should have like multiple sets of clothes immediately. So the devotees built a temporary wooden altar and put up a certain curtain for the deities. But the curtains fell down and everything was going wrong. So it was confusing and like people were very upset over there. So Prabhupada took over the situation and he gave the exact instructions to the devotees, like putting the curtains on the altar, and then he asked them to remove the Vyasasana because the place was very small and the Vyasasana was occupying a lot of space. So he asked the devotees to remove the Vyasasana and asked them to put the mat, and he just sat down on the mat. And then Prabhupada visited Hong Kong, where he lectured at a program arranged by Buri Ajana and his wife Jagatarini. And here Bhurijana mentioned that they had several Indian children sang the prayers to the spiritual master, and Prabhupada was really pleased, and he mentioned that there are so many students here, and Bhurijana mentioned that Prabhupada had a lot of students. And at the end of the lecture, Prabhupada asked if there were any question, and there was like one boy, like little boy, was asking, he was asking question on the wild forest fire, which was mentioned in the Krishna book, in the Krishna pastime, and that boy asked the Prabhupada, like, who started the forest fire? So Prabhupada, for this question, he answered it differently. So he mentioned that no one started the forest fire, and it had started automatically just by the rubbing the bamboos to bamboos, fire may start. But by chanting Hare Krishna, we can get rid of this forest fire of material life.
Thank you. In Japan, the devotees lived in an old farmhouse in the hill country outside Tokyo. Srila Prabhupada stayed in a nearby hotel, installed Radha Krishna deities in the temple, and awarded the sannyas to ISKCON Tokyo's leader, Sudama. Prabhupada said he knew the pulse of his disciples. Thus, he had recently sensed the tendency in his leading managers to be too absorbed in management and not enough in preaching. He had been telling his secretary that GBC men should not simply sit behind their desks and try to centralize power, but should become detached, take sannyas, and travel and preach. With this in mind, he had awarded the sannyas order to two of his GBC secretaries, Damala Krishna and Sudama. Now advised that they not give up their managerial burden, but follow his example of preaching and managing their GBC zones in a renowned spirit. Shyamasundar. Prabhupada's hotel room had rice paper walls and was very cold. It was like coming back into the northern climate, but without central heating. One day I came to Prabhupada's room for Mangala Arati and I had a blanket wrapped around me. I said, "Are you cold, Prabhupada?" I could see he didn't like the cold, but he wasn't going to let that stop him from serving Krishna. Nanda Kumar. At the Sunday feast, there were about 30 Japanese people, mostly young, and every single one brought Prabhupada a flower, put it at his feet, and paid full danvats. They were so respectful. Prabhupada said that it was a good sign that these boys and girls are able to honor a saintly person. Burijan. We had arranged a program in Kobe. Many Indians and Sindhis lived there. It was a long journey out of Tokyo. They put Prabhupada on the third floor of the house, and there was no elevator. Prabhupada just put his chin out and walked right up, even though it was a tremendous effort for him. The engagement was arranged in such a poor way that on the same speaking program with Prabhupada was a Mayavadi sannyasi. Prabhupada wanted to speak first, so he spoke in English. There were quite a few Indians there, about 100. Prabhupada explained very clearly and strongly that Krishna is God. So in Japan, the devotees were living in an old farmhouse right outside of Tokyo, and so Prabhupada stayed in a nearby hotel, and there he installed the Radha Krishna deities, and he awarded sannyas to Tokyo's leader, Sudama. And Prabhupada said he knew the pulse of his disciples, and he said, so explaining that the leading managers were now being, like the GBC managing, were now being too absorbed in management and weren't preaching like they were used to. So he started telling that the GBC men should start like preaching and managing in a renowned spirit. And so he started by awarding two of his GBC secretaries, Tamala Krishna Goswami and Sudama, both sannyas. And then Shyamsundar Prabhu was explaining how Prabhupada's hotel room was so cold, it had rice paper walls, and it was like coming into a northern climate. And one day when Shyamsundar Prabhu went for Mangala Arati, Prabhupada's room, he had a blanket wrapped around him. And when he asked Prabhupada that, "Are you cold?" Prabhupada didn't give direct answer, but he could see that even because Prabhupada was serving Krishna, he didn't mind the cold. And then Nanda Kumar Prabhu said that at the Sunday feast, there are about 30 Japanese people, mostly young like students, and all of them brought a flower for Prabhupada and paid full dandavats. And Prabhupada saw that this was a good sign because these boys and girls were able to honor a saintly person. And Burijan Prabhu said that they had arranged a program in Kobe where many Indians and Sindhis had lived. And it was a long journey from Tokyo. And there's where Prabhupada was staying, there was no elevator. And his room was on the third floor. But Prabhupada just put his chin out and he just walked, even though it was a tremendous effort for him. And the engagement that Prabhupada went to was in a poor way because a Mayavadi sannyasi was also speaking. So Prabhupada spoke first and he spoke in English. And there were about like 100 Indians there. And Prabhupada clearly and strongly stated that Krishna is God.
Okay. We had a devotee girl from Japan who stayed with us for 2 months. We were sharing. Yeah. So she was telling, in Japan, there's not big crowd congregation at this time. I don't know why. But okay, AJ, you please go.
Sorry, it froze. Start with it. Then the other sannyasi began speaking in Hindi. Prabhupada was just sitting there with his eyes closed, chanting japa. Suddenly he looked at us and said, "Start kirtan immediately." So we got up in the middle of the sannyasi speaking and started kirtan. Prabhupada left quickly after the kirtan. When we got back to the room with Prabhupada, he explained what happened. He said, first he was preaching nicely, and then he started explaining Panchopasana, about the 5 different features of the Absolute. And then when he said that the Supreme is ultimately impersonal, I could not tolerate it. Prabhupada said, "I am like a lion when I am out, and a lamb when I am home." Prabhupada had business in Tokyo with his partner, Dai Nippon. He was greatly pleased with the faith Dai Nippon Printing Company had placed in him, giving him hundreds of thousands of dollars credit just on his word. One of Dai Nippon's executives even approached him submissively, inquiring about whether his son, who had died a year and a half ago, had gone to the Buddha. A young Japanese executive who translated the older man's questions and Prabhupada's answers explained to Prabhupada, since then he has been very religious. He was the eldest son, Prabhupada said. 20 years, youngest son. The two executives spoke briefly. He is asking how he can be relieved from such sadness when his son has died. Oh yes, Prabhupada. Prabhupada said. The point is that the success of everything depends on how Krishna is satisfied. That I have explained. Sorry, guys. He related the example of Sandapani Muni, the spiritual master of Krishna and Balaram. Sandapani Muni's son had died, and he requested his two students, my dear boys, I lost my child very young. If you kindly bring him, then I will be very much pleased. So Krishna went to the planet of Yamaraja and brought his son back. So you try to satisfy Krishna and you will be blessed. Your son will be blessed. You pray to Krishna. Wherever your son may be, he will be happy. You believe in reincarnation, next birth. The young man spoke to the elder executive in Japanese. The older man nodded. Prabhupada continued, yes, so your son, he must have taken a body somewhere. So if you pray to Krishna, your son will be happy. He will benefit. So, they were out listening to this sannyasi preach, and in the middle of his preaching, Prabhupada just says, hey, nope, start the kirtan now. Right? He says, we got to start the kirtan now. And then once they started, Prabhupada got up and left. And when they got back, Prabhupada explained, he said, at first this guy was saying nice things. He was saying all the good things about Panchapasana and all the different features of the Absolute. But then he said that the Supreme is impersonal, right? And he said at that point, I couldn't take it anymore. And so I'm like a lion when I'm out, but a lamb when I am at home. So he's like, he got fired up. He was fierce. So Prabhupada had to go, it was in Tokyo, and I guess the printing company had nicely given him, plenty of credit for printing. And one of the executives at the company had come up and asked him about his son who had died. And, he had said, had he gone to Buddha? His son had gone to Buddha. And, I guess the family was very religious, and Prabhupada starts to ask him, or the guy asks, he said, how can I get over this? How can I deal with this sadness that I'm feeling from my son dying? And Prabhupada says, relays the story of Sandapani Muni, who asked Krishna to bring back his son, and make him happy. So Krishna went, to Yamaraja and brought his son back. And so he says, what you need to do? You need to satisfy Krishna, right? If you satisfy Krishna, you'll be blessed, and your son will be blessed. So you just keep praying to Krishna, and wherever your son is, he will be happy, because he's like, you believe in reincarnation, right? And the guy says, yep. And he says, well, then, so your son's just taken another body, right? He's not gone. He's just in another body at this point. So just continue to pray to Krishna. And everybody will be happy. Your son will be happy, and it'll benefit him that you're doing that.
Thank you. Second.
When Prabhupada's GBC secretary for the Western United States, Karandara, arrived in Tokyo to assist in dealing with the Dai Nippon Printing Company, Prabhupada talked with him about his new project in Bombay. He also wrote 2 letters to Giriraj, urging him to begin constructing the Bombay buildings as soon as possible. He wanted Giriraj to model the temple after Jaipur's famous Govindji temple and erect beside it a modern high-rise hotel. And then you shall have the perfect Juhu plan. Prabhupada said Hans, now Surabhi, should finish the drawings and get the city council's approval by June so that they could begin the foundation before the monsoon. I do not think that it is possible, Prabhupada wrote, but if you can try for it, that will be nice. Hawaii, May 6, 1972. During Prabhupada's week-long stay in Honolulu, he installed the 5 deities of the Panchatattva: Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda, Sri Advaita, Sri Gadadhara, Sri Srivasa. He also lectured on yoga at a yoga meditation center. During his morning walks on the beach, he spoke about the fallacies of Darwinism. Waikiki Beach, he commented, was not as beautiful as Juhu. Nandakumara, a little bit down to.
You can summarize now.
Okay. So basically, Prabhupada's GBC secretary for the Western United States, Karandara, came in Tokyo to assist with the deal with the Dai Nippon Printing Company, which was publishing the books. And Prabhupada mentioned to him about the new project in Bombay. He also wrote letters to Giriraj asking him to begin the construction from the Bombay buildings. And he wanted Giriraj to model the temple after the Jaipur's Govinji temple. And besides, it will be a modern high-rise hotel. Hans, who was the designer, architect, now Surabhi, he should finish the drawings and get the city council's approval by June, so that way they could begin foundation before monsoon. And he says it may be difficult, but if you try, that will be nice. And from there, Prabhupada went to Tokyo, he went to Hawaii. He installed the 5 deities of the Panchatattva, and then he also lectured on about yoga in a local yoga center. And he also spoke about the fallacies of Darwinism and mentioned that the Waikiki beach was not as beautiful as Juhu.
Our what is that candidate? Gawad, Tulsi Gawad is from Hawaii. I think she must have grew up in those communities. Yes, Nepa, please.
Nandakumara. At that time, all the devotees in Hawaii were wearing sleeveless t-shirts and bright colors, and they had really big sikkas hanging down very long. Prabhupada said Gaudiya Vaishnava sikka is an inch and a half across, no bigger. Bigger sikkas means another sampradaya, and they have to be knotted. So I told everyone that, and they came back all bright and shiny with saffron shirts and proper sikkas. Govinda Dasi. Prabhupada stayed at a big house in Makapu side of Oahu, right on the ocean, a very pleasant place. In the morning, Prabhupada would walk on the beach, and when he would return from his walk, he would sit down on a wooden bench on a little rock patio. We would all sit around and he would give a little morning lecture. Later, he would walk around and around in his room chanting. One evening, I went in a while he was chanting and he said 16 rounds finished today, and I said yes, Srila Prabhupada, I'm on my 16th round now. He said that is good. So here it says Nandakumar that at the time all the devotees were wearing in Hawaii were wearing sleeveless t-shirts and bright colors, and they had like a big sikka hanging down very long, which is said like Gaudiya Vaishnava sikka is like an inch and a half across and no bigger. So once they realize that they have big sikkas means another sampradaya, and they have noted. So Nandakumar said that they came and once they described the sikka, they came on back all bright and shiny with saffron shirts and proper sikkas. And Govinda Dasi here says Prabhupada stayed in the big house in on the ocean side, which is Makapu side of Oahu, which was a pleasant place. And Prabhupada used to take walk on the beach and return from his walk and sit down on the wooden bench. And we all would sit around and give the morning lecture. He would give a morning lecture. Later, he would walk around in his room and chant. And one evening, while sitting, he was chanting. He said he was on he had 16 runs finished today. And the Govinda Dasi replied, "Yes, Srila Prabhupada, I'm on the 16th round," and he said that is good.
Thank you. Prasanthi?
Prabhupada was also thinking about his Bombay center, and he asked me to do an architectural rendering of his idea for Bombay buildings. Fortunately, an architect friend drew it up very nicely, and Prabhupada was pleased with it. Prabhupada had received a letter from a French disciple, Mandakini Devidasi, who was going to join a Russian boy in the Soviet Union. She was going there to marry him and assist him in propagating Krishna consciousness. When Prabhupada read this letter, he smiled in ecstasy. The thought of Krishna conscious movement increasing in Russia gave him great joy. Then he turned to Govinda Dasi and said, "Preach while you are young. When you are old, retire to Vrindavana and chant Hare Krishna." Therefore, these centers in India are being built. But you cannot retire unless you have preached sufficiently. The mind will agitate. If you have preached, you will retire and chant Hare Krishna. So preach as much as possible. Prabhupada was thinking, sure. Although sometimes Prabhupada could spend only a day or even only a moment with an individual devotee, that brief association would leave a permanent inspiration. The devotees would realize that although Prabhupada had touched them and given them guidance in a way that made these the most important moments in their lives, Prabhupada was also beyond the moment and place that he shared with them, and was contemplating deeper issues and praying to Krishna with an intensity that they could not yet understand. Prabhupada was thinking about the Bombay Center and about its architecture, how the buildings have to be built. Then an architect friend drew some buildings very nicely, and Prabhupada was very pleased. Prabhupada learned through a letter from a French disciple, Mandakini Devidasi, that she was going to Russia to see a devotee and marry him, and also assist him in propagating Krishna consciousness in Russia. So that really pleased Prabhupada. And he told Govinda Dasi that when you become old, you should go to Vrindavana. But now, when you are young, you have to preach as much as possible, because the mind will agitate, and you have to continue preaching and chant Hare Krishna. And when you retire, you can chant Hare Krishna. So preach as much as possible right now.
Who did Prabhupada give the instruction?
To all young people.
Nice. Prasanti got young people means to all of us, all of you also. Right? It's not a we should not understand like, okay, who got the instruction? Govinda Dasi. It is for all of us. Did you like the idea? Or you want to sit at home in 80 years old, with tubes inside in the mouth and nose everywhere? Jamla, did you hear the instruction? Another interesting thing. Did you all see what happened? Is the French girl with the French girl? Did you all know what is the incident behind it? French girl for marriage. I mean, unbelievable. She's going to Russia. Listen. She's going to Russia to get married, which she's never met that man. Just Prabhupada asked, what can I do? Can you please marry him? That's it, and I will. And she joined the movement for preaching. Such a big risk, Russia going and serving there. What kind of devotees, calibrate or the kind of devotees we are reading about? Never know, never met, heard name, just I'm going and getting married because my spiritual master asked. And that's why now so many Russians also are getting benefits, just like we are getting benefits. It's a very deep commitment. These disciples are worshipable for us. Okay, we'll Vijayan and Prabhu quickly, then we'll end 5 minutes early today.
Although sometimes Prabhupada could spend only a day or even only a moment with an individual devotee, that brief association would leave a permanent inspiration. The devotees would realize that although Prabhupada touched them and given them guidance in a way that made these the most important moments in their life. Prabhupada was also beyond the moment and the place that he shared with them, and was contemplating deeper issues and praying to Krishna with an intensity that they could not yet understand. Prabhupada received a letter in Hawaii from Giriraja that made him doubt his Bombay manager's abilities to deal with the clever Mr. N. Giriraja reported matter of factly that he had just paid 7,500 rupees to Mr. N, and Prabhupada wrote back, on what account is that paid? Giriraja had intended it to be installment toward the agreed 2 lakhs per year that they were supposed to pay Mr. N. After they received the deed, but why should they be unnecessarily paying Mr. N since still they had no deed? Prabhupada began to worry about his Hare Krishna land. So here, it explains about the relationship of the devotee with Prabhupada. Even though Prabhupada spent only a day or even a moment with the individual devotee, it will leave them with a permanent inspiration. And the devotee realized that although Prabhupada fed them and gave them the guidance in a way, but this made them the important moments in their life. And Prabhupada was also beyond the moment, and the place he shared with them was contemplating deeper issues and praying to Krishna with an intensity that they could not at all understand. And there was a letter from Giriraja to Prabhupada when he was in Hawaii, and which made him to doubt the qualities of his Bombay manager's abilities to deal with the clever Mr. N. Because it was mentioned that Giriraja made a payment of 7,500 rupees to Mr. N, without a deed actually. And Prabhupada asked him on what account it was paid, and Giriraja mentioned that it is an installment toward the agreed 2 lakhs per year, which was supposed to be paid to Mr. N. Basically, that payment was supposed to be paid only after the deed is done, but looks like Giriraja Prabhu made the payment without the deed is completed. So it started worrying in Prabhupada, because they made an unnecessary payment without a deed. So he was worrying about the Hare Krishna land.
So much. Hopefully, we had a wonderful reading. I relished all this, and I know that we have a meeting also at 9, and devotees has to read. So I'm giving 5 minutes break to our cycle and all of you. Thank you so much. We'll meet tomorrow. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Prabhupada Lilamrita ki jai. Thank you. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Have a good night.